On September 24th, 1831, in Cambridge, Massachusetts, over 2,000 upper-class Americans dressed in their most elegant attire gathered for a highly unusual event. They did not attend the premiere of a new theatrical play, nor did they arrive for a lavish grand ball. Instead, they gathered to picnic, stroll, and dine across a sprawling 72-acre plot of land, a place specifically designed to bury the dead. This was the inauguration day of Mount Auburn, the very first landscaped cemetery in the United States. Within just a few short decades, this seemingly paradoxical event sparked a massive cultural revolution, transforming foul-smelling, overcrowded churchyard burial grounds into the breathtaking, serene memorial parks that now stretch across the nation. But what few people realize is that the concept of a peaceful, quiet, and tree-shaded cemetery, something our generation takes for granted, is actually a remarkably recent invention of human civilization. Rusted iron gates, moss-covered stone monuments, and the solitary silhouette of a mourner standing quietly in the mist. These are the images that immediately come to mind when we think of a final resting place. Yet, buried deep beneath those perfectly manicured green lawns, lies a dark, turbulent history, holding thorny truths about power, wealth, and humanity's ultimate fear of decay. For the vast majority of human history, our ancient ancestors had absolutely no concept of digging into the earth to hide away the bodies of their loved ones. So, how exactly did ancient people dispose of corpses before the very first cemeteries even existed? And why is it that the oldest known burial efforts ever discovered by archaeologists were not meant to honor the dead, but were actually a cruel punishment designed to isolate and condemn the souls of transgressors? It is estimated by demographers that roughly 117 billion human beings have lived and died on this planet since the dawn of our species. Yet, if you look around our modern world, the mathematical reality simply does not add up. Less than 10% of all the humans who have ever walked the earth are resting beneath a tombstone or confined to a marked grave. So, where exactly did everyone else go? To understand the true history of the cemetery, we must first shatter the illusion that burial is a universal human instinct. For the vast majority of our existence on Earth, placing a cherished loved one into the cold, dark dirt was considered unnatural, primitive, and even horrific. Instead, our ancient ancestors devised incredibly diverse and sometimes shocking methods of parting with their dead. Long before European settlers brought their cobblestone churchyards to the New World, the indigenous tribes of North America had a vastly different approach to mortality. On the sweeping, wind-blown plains of the Dakotas, the Sioux people did not dig graves. Instead, they gently wrapped their fallen warriors in buffalo hides and elevated them on towering wooden scaffolds, or cradled them high within the sturdy branches of ancient cottonwood trees. They believed the open air would allow the spirit to travel freely into the afterlife, untouched and unburdened by the damp earth. Others surrendered their dead to the most unforgiving environments on the planet. Consider the staggering archaeological discovery made in the year 1999 near the frozen summit of Mount Llayalco in the Andes Mountains of Argentina, at an elevation of over 22,000 feet. There, explorers found the perfectly preserved remains of a 15-year-old Incan girl, left completely exposed to the freezing winds over 500 years ago. She was not buried. She was offered directly to the mountain peaks. Across the globe, on the remote plains of the Tibetan Plateau, a practice known as sky burial has endured for over 11,000 years. Because the frozen ground is too hard to dig, and timber is far too scarce for cremation fires, the deceased are brought to sacred mountaintops, where their bodies are respectfully offered to flocks of waiting vultures. To the modern Western mind, this might sound brutally gruesome, but to the Tibetan people, It is the ultimate act of compassion, a final gesture of charity to sustain living creatures. Meanwhile, deep in the Amazon rainforest of Brazil, the Wari people engaged in the ritualistic consumption of their deceased loved ones, a deeply spiritual practice that continued well into the 1960s to help the living absorb their grief. And in Varanasi, India, for more than 3,000 years, millions have been cremated on the banks of the Ganges River, their ashes swept away by the sacred currents, whether left in caves, hoisted into trees, offered to birds of prey, consumed, or surrendered to the water. All of these practices shared one fundamental truth. Though they may seem utterly alien or terrifying to us today, they were profound acts of love. They were the ultimate ways of venerating the departed. But if the open air, the roaring fire, and the flowing water were the preferred methods of honoring those we cherished most, what drove humanity to start burying bodies in the dirt? The answer lies hidden in a dark, forgotten chapter of our deep past, where the very first graves were not dug as a final tribute, but as a desperate measure to hide something far more sinister. To uncover the true genesis of the grave, we must travel back roughly 120,000 years into the shadowy, unforgiving depths of the Paleolithic era. In places like the Kafse cave, located in modern-day Israel, archaeologists have unearthed some of the earliest known evidence of human burial. But these ancient trenches were not dug with love, nor were they accompanied by somber hymns or tearful eulogies. Anthropologists now believe that the very first interments were likely reserved strictly for the outcasts, the severely diseased, or the most egregious transgressors of the tribe, for a primitive society that worshipped the boundless sky, the sun, and the open elements. Shoving a body into a dark, suffocating hole in the ground was not considered a tribute. It was a deliberate, total exclusion. It was a brutal, calculated punishment designed to trap the spirit in the dirt, effectively cutting the offender off from the sacred, traditional rites of passing into the great beyond. However, as time marched on, our ancient ancestors began to notice an undeniable, practical advantage to this earthly imprisonment. Leaving a body exposed to the elements meant subjecting the grieving family to the traumatic, lingering sight of natural decay. Worse still, an exposed corpse acted as a highly visible beacon for dangerous predators. Packs of ancient hyenas and dire wolves were relentlessly drawn to the scent of death, posing a lethal threat to the living, breathing members of the tribe. By pressing a thick layer of heavy soil over the deceased, early humans discovered that they could effectively mask the scent of mortality, deter the approach of hungry scavengers, and shield their own eyes from the agonizing reality of decomposition. Slowly, over thousands of generations, this purely pragmatic solution initiated a profound psychological shift. The cold earth transformed from a grim prison for the wicked into a protective, comforting blanket for the cherished. This remarkable evolution of human thought is perhaps best illustrated right here on the North American continent, buried deep beneath the rugged terrain of the American West. In the year 1968, construction workers in Wilsall, Montana, stumbled upon a breathtaking sight that completely changed our understanding of ancient grief. Dating back 12,600 years, this site held the delicate remains of a one-year-old infant boy, known to scientists as Anzik I. Unlike the exiled outcasts of the ancient Middle East, this child was buried with extraordinary, heartbreaking tenderness. His tiny body was gently covered with 115 carefully crafted stone and bone tools, which were likely precious heirloom possessions offered by mourning relatives. The entire burial pit was heavily dusted with a vibrant, blood-red ochre powder, a sacred mineral historically used to symbolize the enduring spark of life. This single, lonely grave in Montana proves that burial had officially transitioned from a crude disposal method into a deeply spiritual act, complete with the firm belief in an afterlife where a little boy might need tools to survive. Yet, even with these loving tributes, the concept of a dedicated communal cemetery simply did not exist. Humans were nomadic hunters and gatherers, constantly chasing migrating herds of mammoth and bison across the shifting seasons. When someone died, they were respectfully buried right where they fell, and the tribe moved on, leaving the solitary grave behind in the vast, untamed wilderness. It was not until roughly 10,000 to 15,000 years ago that a monumental shift occurred in North Africa and the Levant region of West Asia. A group known as the Natufian culture achieved something entirely revolutionary. They stopped walking. Driven by a warming global climate and the sudden abundance of wild grains, humanity began to build the very first permanent settlements. They traded their temporary animal hide tents for sturdy stone dwellings, and they traded the unpredictable wild hunt for the reliable harvest of early agriculture. This agricultural revolution changed human destiny forever, and it fundamentally altered our relationship with the dead. Because the living were no longer migrating, the dead could no longer be left behind on the hunting trail. For the first time in human history, communities were forced to designate specific, permanent plots of land located just outside their newly built villages solely for the purpose of communal burial. By rooting themselves to the soil to grow crops, mankind inadvertently rooted their ancestors to the very same earth. These humble, clustered grave sites in the ancient Middle East were the true, original blueprints for every single cemetery we know today. But as these early agricultural tribes expanded into sprawling, powerful empires, the simple dirt grave would soon be weaponized. It was about to become the ultimate symbol of wealth, power, and military conquest, spreading across the globe in ways no one could have ever predicted. As human civilization evolved from scattered farming villages into sprawling, heavily armed empires, the simple act of digging a grave underwent a radical transformation. No longer just a humble way to hide the scent of decay, the burial ground became a loud, ostentatious theater for displaying wealth, military dominance, and absolute power. Consider the fearsome Scythian warriors who ruled the Eurasian steppes beginning in the 9th century before Christ. Instead of modest earthen holes, Scythian kings demanded to be buried beneath colossal, towering mounds of earth known as kurgans. Deep within these artificial mountains, archaeologists have discovered royal warlords surrounded by pure gold armor, alongside the skeletal remains of up to 50 sacrificed horses and dozens of executed servants. To these ancient conquerors, a grave was not a place of peaceful rest, but a heavily fortified military command center designed to conquer the afterlife. But as humanity began to build highly organized, densely populated cities, this obsession with massive, sprawling tombs clashed with the strict limits of urban real estate. The ancient Etruscans of central Italy solved this problem by constructing expansive necropoles, a term that literally translates to cities of the dead. They meticulously engineered underground grids of streets, complete with carved stone homes and designated neighborhoods, treating their deceased ancestors as active members of the community. Soon after, the ancient Greeks adopted a softer, more comforting philosophy, officially coining the term cemetery, which originates from the Greek word kometerion, translating exactly to a sleeping chamber. They strategically placed these sleeping chambers strictly at the edges of their city limits, creating a physical boundary between the bustling world of the living and the silent realm of the dead. Yet, the lingering question remained: what exactly happens when a thriving empire grows so massively that it simply runs out of space above the ground? The mighty Roman Empire faced this exact demographic nightmare as its capital city swelled to over 1 million living inhabitants by the 1st century. Roman law strictly forbade any burials within the sacred city walls to prevent the horrific spread of disease, forcing families to build elaborate monuments along the famous Appian Way. For the wealthy elite, these roadside tombs were prime real estate, designed to loudly demand the attention of passing travelers and marching military legions. But for the impoverished masses and the persecuted early Christians, the only affordable direction to expand was straight down into the dark, volcanic rock. Beneath the bustling streets of Rome, workers carved over 300 miles of subterranean catacombs, a dizzying, labyrinthine network of pitch-black tunnels that eventually housed the bones of nearly 6 million citizens. This subterranean exile kept the dead neatly hidden away, but a massive religious shift was about to drag those millions of corpses right back into the center of daily life. With the sweeping triumph of Christianity across Europe during the Middle Ages, the ancient Roman concept of banishing the dead to the city outskirts was completely abandoned. Believers desperately wanted to be buried in the holiest ground possible, which meant placing their bodies as close to the local parish altar as they could physically manage. By the 12th century, the massive, open-air Roman graveyards had been entirely replaced by tiny, cramped churchyards located squarely in the beating heart of bustling European metropolises like London and Paris. However, these sacred churchyards were absolutely nothing like the quiet, meticulously landscaped memorial parks that modern Americans enjoy today. Because the churchyard was often the only open, unbuilt space in a crowded medieval city, it doubled as the primary center for loud, chaotic public life. Would you believe that the very ground meant for eternal rest was actually the loudest, dirtiest, and most commercially active place in town? In places like St. Paul's Churchyard in medieval London, the burial ground was a chaotic explosion of commerce, celebration, and crude survival. Merchants aggressively hawked their wares over freshly dug graves, while traveling fairs, theatrical performances, and even public executions drew roaring crowds of thousands. Local farmers routinely brought herds of 20 to 30 cattle to graze directly on top of the burial plots, firmly believing that grass nourished by the dead produced significantly sweeter milk. By the year 1500, places like the Cemetery of the Holy Innocents in Paris were processing an estimated 2 million bodies in a space smaller than a modern American football field, forcing gravediggers to constantly unearth old bones to make room for new corpses. The living and the dead were intimately, almost uncomfortably, woven together in a constant cycle of daily survival. But as the dawn of the Industrial Revolution began to draw millions of rural workers into these already bursting cities, this cozy medieval arrangement was about to mutate into a terrifying public health catastrophe. As the roaring fires of the Industrial Revolution began to transform the youthful United States, millions of rural Americans packed their bags and flooded into rapidly expanding urban centers. But while the towering factories and bustling ports brought unprecedented wealth, they also created a suffocating, deadly nightmare right beneath the cobblestone streets. The ancient, cozy tradition of burying the departed in small, neighborhood churchyards suddenly collapsed under the sheer, crushing weight of modern mortality. Gravediggers in booming cities like Boston and New York were forced to dig horrifyingly massive pits, plunging up to 30 feet deep into the damp earth. They stacked fragile wooden coffins on top of one another, 20 or 30 deep, until the topmost lid rested just a few inches below the boots of passing pedestrians. The dead were quite literally overflowing into the world of the living, and the psychological toll on the American public was absolutely devastating. The true horror of this overcrowding climaxed during the sweltering summer of 1793, when a catastrophic yellow fever epidemic struck the nation's capital city of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. In a matter of agonizing months, the terrifying plague wiped out over 5,000 citizens, instantly erasing roughly 10% of the city's entire population. The local churchyards simply could not swallow the sheer volume of corpses arriving at their iron gates. Fluids from the decaying bodies began to seep directly into the shallow city wells, poisoning the drinking water. A suffocating putrid stench hung heavy in the humid air, terrifying citizens who firmly believed that this foul odor, known as miasma, was the literal source of the plague. Families watched in total despair as the sacred resting places of their loved ones devolved into toxic, rotting sinkholes that threatened to kill whoever was left behind. But the fear of disease was nothing compared to the sinister, deeply disturbing threat that stalked the American churchyards long after the sun went down. As modern medicine rapidly advanced, prestigious Ivy League universities and urban medical schools developed an insatiable, desperate hunger for fresh human cadavers for anatomical dissection. Because early American laws strictly forbade the dissection of anyone other than executed murderers, a grotesque black market was born. Medical colleges secretly hired ruthless gangs of thieves known as resurrection men, operating under the pale moonlight with wooden shovels to muffle the sound of scraping dirt. These men systematically looted the graves of the most vulnerable citizens. They heavily targeted marginalized communities, ruthlessly plundering sites like the African Burial Ground in Lower Manhattan, which held the remains of over 15,000 enslaved and free black individuals who had no legal protection or heavy iron vaults to guard their sleep. The simmering public outrage over this macabre underworld finally exploded on the afternoon of April 13th, 1788, sparking one of the most gruesome and bizarre uprisings in American history. On that fateful Sunday in New York City, a group of young boys was playing outside the windows of the New York hospital. According to historical accounts, a callous medical student named John Hicks decided to play a cruel joke. He allegedly leaned out of the dissection room window, waving a severed human arm at a young boy, viciously taunting the child that the severed limb belonged to his recently deceased mother. Terrified and heartbroken, the boy ran home to tell his father, a local mason. Gripped by a sudden sickening dread, the father immediately marched to the Trinity Church Cemetery and dug up his wife's grave. He opened the wooden coffin, only to find it completely, horrifyingly empty. Word of the stolen body spread through the taverns and docks like a raging wildfire. By nightfall, a furiously grieving mob of over 2,000 New Yorkers, armed with pickaxes and flaming torches, violently stormed the hospital doors. They dragged terrified medical students into the streets, burned valuable medical equipment to ash, and pulled half-dissected corpses from the walls. The sheer chaos, known as the Doctors Riot, raged relentlessly for 3 bloody days, forcing the governor to call in the armed militia, ultimately leaving at least 20 people dead in the streets. The terrifying message was crystal clear to the American public. The old European way of burying the dead in crowded urban churchyards was fundamentally broken. The city of the dead was actively poisoning and terrorizing the city of the living. And if the nation was going to survive, they needed to invent a radically new, uniquely American way to lay their loved ones to rest. To escape the festering, disease-ridden urban churchyards of the early 19th century, wealthy Americans fled to the countryside, establishing sprawling, landscaped havens like Mount Auburn. But this romantic, garden-like approach to death was soon obliterated by the most catastrophic bloodbath in American history. From 1861 to 1865, the American Civil War unleashed a terrifying scale of mortality that the young, divided nation was entirely unprepared to handle. Over 620,000 soldiers were violently killed on distant battlefields, dying hundreds of miles away from the comforting embrace of their local parishes. In the sweltering heat of the southern summers, these fallen sons and fathers rapidly decomposed, making it physically impossible to ship their remains back to grieving families on slow-moving cargo trains. The country faced an unprecedented logistical nightmare of flesh and bone, desperately needing a scientific miracle to halt the unforgiving forces of nature. That miracle arrived in the form of a brilliant, albeit deeply eccentric, medical pioneer named Dr. Thomas Holmes, who is now widely remembered as the father of modern American embalming. Operating out of makeshift medical tents, stationed right on the edges of the battlefields, Dr. Holmes perfected a revolutionary, yet highly toxic, new technique. He forcefully injected heavy, arsenic-based chemical fluids directly into the severed arteries of the deceased soldiers, miraculously halting the natural decay process and transforming the corpse into a rigid, odorless statue. Seizing an incredibly lucrative wartime opportunity, Dr. Holmes personally embalmed over 4,000 Union soldiers, charging distraught families exactly $100 per body to guarantee their boy would return home recognizable. This morbidly fascinating medical procedure, once considered deeply unnatural and unsettling, suddenly became the ultimate act of patriotic devotion and familial love. The total normalization of this chemical preservation reached its absolute pinnacle following the tragic assassination of President Abraham Lincoln in April of 1865. To allow a shattered, grieving nation to collectively mourn, the government meticulously embalmed the president's body and placed it aboard a special funeral train that slowly chugged across the northern states. For 19 agonizing days, traveling exactly 1,654 miles, millions of weeping Americans stood by the railway tracks, staring in absolute awe at a corpse that stubbornly refused to decay. Simultaneously, the sheer, staggering volume of the war dead forced the federal government to seize vast tracts of private land, formally establishing the United States National Cemetery System, anchored by the hallowed, perfectly aligned grounds of Arlington, Virginia. The American way of death had officially been industrialized, heavily standardized, and inextricably linked to federal patriotism. However, as the country marched boldly into the 20th century, the sprawling romantic gardens of the Victorian era and the rigid uniform rows of military graves gave way to a new, hyper-efficient corporate vision. In the year 1906, a bold businessman named Hubert Eaton took control of Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California, fundamentally rewriting the visual landscape of American grief. Eaton passionately despised the traditional, gloomy graveyards, filled with jagged, upright tombstones, publicly declaring them depressing eyesores that wasted valuable land and terrified visitors. He aggressively implemented a controversial new rule, strictly banning all upright monuments and demanding that families use only flat bronze plaques set perfectly flush with the surrounding earth. This calculated aesthetic choice completely revolutionized the cemetery industry, not merely for its cheerful, park-like appearance, but because it allowed fleets of motorized lawnmowers to glide smoothly over the dead, drastically slashing groundskeeping costs. With a single stroke of corporate genius, the cemetery was completely transformed from a sacred, community-centered resting place into a highly lucrative, smoothly operating commercial enterprise. The sprawling memorial parks of the 20th century sold Americans a brilliant, comforting illusion, a pristine, eternally green paradise that completely erased the visual, ugly reality of death. But behind the manicured hedges, the sparkling fountains, and the soothing classical music piped through hidden outdoor speakers, a silent, invisible ecological time bomb was slowly ticking beneath the soil. As millions of chemically preserved bodies, sealed in heavy metal caskets and thick concrete vaults, were lowered into the earth year after year, this magnificent modern industry was quietly preparing to unleash a devastating crisis that no one dared to talk about. Today, as you stroll through the perfectly manicured, emerald green lawns of an American memorial park, you are essentially walking on top of an incredibly well-disguised ecological disaster. The comforting illusion of the modern cemetery with its sweeping willow trees and whispering fountains is actively hiding a massive, toxic reality that we have deliberately buried out of sight. Every single year, the traditional American funeral industry drops over 800,000 gallons of formaldehyde-based embalming fluid directly into the soil. Formaldehyde is a highly toxic, known human carcinogen, and as the heavy metal caskets inevitably rust and degrade over the decades, these dangerous chemicals slowly leach out, silently threatening our fragile groundwater systems. But the environmental devastation does not stop at toxic chemicals. To protect these artificially preserved bodies from the natural weight of the earth, we bury over 1.5 million tons of heavy reinforced concrete in the form of underground burial vaults, alongside enough pristine hardwood to build thousands of single-family homes every single year. Without even realizing it, we have effectively transformed our most sacred resting places into heavily fortified, highly toxic underground landfills. Furthermore, our sprawling urban centers are quite literally running out of room for the dead. In global metropolises like London, England, and the densely packed boroughs of New York City, available burial plots have become so incredibly scarce that purchasing a simple grave is now an astronomical financial burden, a luxury reserved almost exclusively for the ultra-wealthy. These massive, permanent stone cities of the dead permanently lock away hundreds of thousands of acres of valuable land that can never be developed, farmed, or returned to nature. Faced with these skyrocketing costs and a sudden stark awareness of this massive ecological footprint, a quiet but powerful cultural rebellion has begun. For decades, millions of Americans have increasingly turned away from the casket, choosing the fiery efficiency of cremation. Yet, even the intense heat of the crematory relies heavily on the consumption of fossil fuels, releasing millions of tons of carbon dioxide into the warming atmosphere. Humanity desperately needed a radically different approach. We needed to look backward, far past the smoky Industrial Revolution, past the crowded Roman catacombs, and past the extravagant Scythian gold, to remember what our ancient, nomadic ancestors always knew. We needed to return to the earth. In the month of May, in the year 2019, a profoundly historic legislative shift occurred that fundamentally altered the future of human death. The state of Washington officially became the first jurisdiction in the entire world to legally permit a revolutionary, yet beautifully ancient, practice known as natural organic reduction, widely referred to as human composting. The process is a stunning reversal of the Civil War embalming era. Instead of being pumped full of harsh chemical preservatives and locked eternally inside a suffocating steel vault, the deceased is gently laid inside a specialized, reusable steel vessel. They are tenderly surrounded by natural materials like simple wood chips, fragrant alfalfa, and golden straw. Through the glorious, natural miracle of heat and microscopic microbial activity, over the course of exactly 30 days, a human body is completely and safely transformed into roughly 1 cubic yard of nutrient-rich, life-giving soil. This incredible breakthrough is the ultimate plot twist in our long, complicated history with mortality. It allows grieving families to take the literal soil of their loved ones and use it to plant a blossoming apple tree, fertilize a vibrant flower garden, or help restore a damaged native forest. After roughly 120,000 years of desperately trying to hide from the dirt, digging deep trenches to trap spirits in the ground, and building impenetrable concrete fortresses to aggressively defy the forces of nature, we are finally tearing down the walls. We are actively, willingly choosing to surrender to the natural cycle once again, proving that the ultimate end of one beautiful life can quite literally become the life-saving foundation for another. When we stand quietly beneath the ancient, weeping willow trees of an American memorial park, staring down at the carved names of those who came before us, it is easy to believe that we are looking at a permanent, unchanging truth. But as we have seen, the cemetery is not a static institution. It is a deeply flawed, ever-evolving mirror of human civilization itself. From the terrified ancient tribes who buried their dead to hide the brutal scent of decay, to the wealthy medieval kings who built golden mountains to conquer the afterlife, and finally to the grieving American mothers of the Civil War who embraced the harsh chemicals of embalming just to see their boys one last time. Every single monument, tombstone, and unmarked grave tells the exact same story. We realize now that we have never truly built cemeteries for the dead. The dead do not need manicured lawns, heavy concrete vaults, or expensive bronze plaques. We build these vast, silent cities entirely for the living. We dig into the earth to create a physical anchor for our own overwhelming grief. A designated geographical coordinate where we can stand and converse with the memories of those we have lost. The cemetery is our ultimate, desperate attempt to hold on to the past in a world that relentlessly pushes us toward the future. And as we boldly step further into the 21st century, facing unprecedented ecological crises and overcrowded cities, we are once again forced to adapt, whether we choose to be preserved in steel and stone, scattered as ashes upon the roaring ocean, or gently transformed back into the life-giving soil through natural composting. One beautiful truth remains absolutely certain. The physical monuments of stone and concrete will eventually crumble to dust. But the profound human need to remember, to honor, and to love will endure for as long as our species walks this earth. If this journey through the dark, hidden history of our final resting places has given you a new perspective on life and mortality, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more deep historical dives. We want to hear from you. After learning the true history of the American cemetery, how would you prefer to be remembered? Would you choose the quiet tradition of a memorial park? Or do you find comfort in returning completely to the earth? Please share your thoughts and stories in the comments below, and thank you so much for watching.